Hey guys, what's going on? My name is Dan and this is Stout Gaming. I am joined today by Ryan and Matt. How are you two doing?
Doing pretty well.
Doing great. How about yourself, Dan?
I'm doing well as well, thank you for asking. So, right now we are looking at the Great Lakes Draft League. We are in the second of three different divisions that we're going to be breaking down a power ranking for. This is the Superior Division, which is theoretically the top division in the league. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about the methodology we did before we get into this. This is not a reflection on an individual coach or to say that we think one team is just always going to beat a team that's lower than it. The way that we look at power rankings is that if we gave 100 equally skilled coaches the same team and had them all fight in a mass battle royale, the team that we would expect to have the best standings at the end is the team we have ranked 1 and then all the way down through ranked 12. So this isn't about individual one-on-one matchups or about coach skill, and I just wanted to get that out of the way. But before we get into it, I just want to introduce the two guests. Ryan, you guys know, is the recurring guest. He is a coach in the Superior Division as well as I am. He's the coach of the Boston Brelooms, Piano Guy 27 in Discord. And then we have an uninvested third party who is not a member of the GLDL to give us some insight that, as members of the league, we might not be thinking of. His name is Matt. I guess I already introduced him once, but Matt was the champion of the MDL in Season 2 and a former champion of the MBC as well. So thank you for joining us, Matt.
No problem. Glad to be here.
Yeah, and without any further ado, we're going to look into the teams. Unlike the other two divisions, Superior, we're not going in draft order. We are going in order from 12th to 1st in the power ranking. And Matt, I'm going to let you go ahead and take this first team that we have rated 12th, which is the Ocala Obstacoons with an average power ranking of 12.00. So between the three of us, their average ranking was 12th. So Matt, why don't you take this one?
Okay, so this one's rather tough. I can see the first few top tier picks here. You got the Glastrier, Dusclops, Pheromosa. That makes sense to me. It's the Pheromosa is a little risky. It might be you might even call it a little bit of a meme. But if the Pheromosa Glastrier combo goes off, then it's going to end up being pretty powerful. It's just rather volatile and can be hard to use. But I get what's going on there. You got a Trick Room mode with the Glastrier. You can hit your own Glastrier for weakness policy stuff with the Dusclops. Dusclops and Glastrier are both very slow, or you can do coaching and speed swap stuff with Pheromosa and Glastrier. That I get. That seems fine. The rest of this draft, I have little to no idea what's actually going on here. I feel that it's much too top heavy without actually filling out the middle tiers with useful Pokemon. There were just kind of too many high tier resources spent on support for Glastrier without really much thought for what the rest of the team is going to do and how the rest of the team is actually going to score some KOs. And that's coming from somebody who's basically an Ice Horse simp. I have loved this thing in VGC since Crown Tundra came out. I have not actually used it in a draft league before, but I've used it endlessly in regular VGC throughout series, starting from Series 7. In every series we've done, I realize how incredibly strong it is, but it's not enough to carry everything by itself, and it kind of seems, especially in draft when you can hard prep for it, and it kind of seems like that's what's going on here. Even this sun mode that the Obstagoons have toward the bottom seems like almost seems like Glastrier centric. It seems like it doesn't really have a whole lot going for it by itself. First of all, you have to use the Vulpix to set the sun, which is awkward, or use manual sun, which is also awkward. And then it kind of seems like you either want to get the Cherim in with Glastrier while sun is up, so the Glastrier can take advantage of the Flower Gift, or you want like Lilligant with After You also next to the Glastrier. That's at least what I'm assuming this is meant to do, which is also kind of awkward because Glastrier's only stab move is going to reset the weather when you max it, which you're definitely going to be doing. So I think it's a little bit awkward positioning that kind of mode when you have to set the sun with one thing. You have to use one of the grass types as your sun abuser and get it next to the Glastrier. I feel like the positioning there is going to be a nightmare, and if you can't position correctly, that mode's just not going to put out any offense at all. I don't feel like it's going to do anything. And some of these, like I said, some of these middle tier picks just like they just don't really make sense. I feel like the Dusknoir and the Excelgor are pretty redundant. The Dusknoir and Dusclops are not really that different. The Excelgor, I mean, you already have your super fast bug type Pokemon with Pheromosa. And I just don't really feel like Golisopod or Chansey or Quillfish are filling much of a role here. So I do see that we have Colossal here as a first transaction. I do think that that's an improvement, although I don't know how much, because I really, really don't like Colossal as a tier 1 Pokemon. I think it's just it's too easy to hard prep for it, and you can pick up much more valuable stuff in the top tier. So I don't really like that very much, even though he clearly has some priority water moves to proc it. But yeah, there's a lot of problems I see with this team. I feel like if you can just hard prep the Glastrier and hard prep for the kinds of modes that this team is going to be using with the Glastrier, you're going to be fine against it. That's what it seems like to me.
Yeah, I would agree. Ryan, before I get into it, do you have any brief thoughts? I know this is your week 1 opponent, so I'm not going to ask you to get too in-depth on it, but just a very, very general overview.
General overview, a lot of it, I think, just boils down to niche redundancy, which is kind of what Matt was talking about. A lot of these mons do the same thing as each other. This team is also just a little too physically oriented, I think. There's other max options here than the Glastrier. Glastrier is not the only thing that can max here. You can max Dusknoir and Golisopod as well, but they're also physical attackers. And real quick, just to throw my 2 cents in on Colossal, can Colossal work under Trick Room? Yes, it has a speed stat that works under Trick Room. Does Colossal hit very hard without weakness policy proc? Not really, which I think that's a big mistake a lot of people make. The residual's nice, but I've seen a lot of people say, oh, well, Colossal's going to work great under Trick Room, and it's like, you kind of want it with Steam Engine weakness policy, if you can afford to have it. Like, I feel like if you're running the Trick Room Colossal, its attacking stats are just, its base attacking stats are just kind of low for that sort of a role, unless you're doing like a Meteor Beam set.
To be fair, I think that weakness policy Colossal can still work well under Trick Room. You just don't make the mistake of accidentally putting Steam Engine on it, of course.
Right.
But the problem with that here is that the best thing to use with the Trick Room Colossal on
is the Assault
I was gonna say the Dusclops, because the Dusclops is your Trick Room setter that's gonna be slower than the Colossal and can actually proc it with a number of different moves, Rock Tomb or Brick Break or Bulldoze. It's because that's the thing you're getting rid of. It's a lot more difficult to actually make use of it as a Trick Room mod.
Yeah, one thing that I noticed about this team, at least before the Colossal swap, was that they had 5 things that were weak to flying or max airstream without a resist, which max airstream is going to show up in most draft league matches. It's going to be the most common max attack from my experience, so that's always something to be a little wary of. The Chansey pick, I can actually respect, because Chansey and Shuckle, there were 2 coaches that were talking about wanting them, and then they just sniped each other with them. So I kind of understand it, but it's also taking up a slot and isn't going to be doing much for your team. Golisopod in Tier 4, I do like, I'm not going to lie. It's pretty cool. It's got, 140 base attack. It can do a decent chunk of damage, but overall, this is a team that is centralized completely on Glastrier and going to be relying on the power of Glastrier to carry it through. And don't get me wrong, I think it will for a number of games that Glastrier is going to be able to hard carry this team because that's just what Glastrier does. That's why it's the only Pokemon that was worth 70 points in a free slot. But I just don't know if the rest of this team carries enough weight to make up for the games where Glastrier isn't able to do that.
Yeah.
But with that being said, let's go ahead and look at this next team, the Greedy Greninjas. Orion, do you want to take this one, since I know there's a Pokemon here you're a pretty big fan of?
Yes. So the Greedy Greninjas, one thing with the Superior Division that I would like to comment on is that in general, these teams are quite good. We're being pretty intentionally here with some of these, just kind of off the bat. So I do want to be clear on that before we go too much further. These teams are, in general, going to be quite good. I think the Greninjas have a team with a lot of potential, actually. But I just feel like some of the pieces are misplaced a bit. So Tier 1 Incin, in my experience, Incineroar kind of tends to underperform in draft. It's also the only Tier 1 here. And then you have Togetic as your Tier 2. Now, Togetic's an awesome mon in draft. But what is it being paired with on this team? What, does Togetic redirection really help a lot? Because Incineroar can do damage, but it's not something like a Porygon Z or a, Kartana, some kind of big wall breaker. It doesn't really support anything like that. You've got Escav and Serena, but those mons aren't really gonna, those mons want different support options. And then you've got the Crobat, which is great because it's an amazing Tailwind setter. But what on this team the main Tailwind mons that I see are the Incineroar and Serena, which again, I don't see a ton of damage output there. Now the low tier picks I actually quite like on this team. Jinx is super slept on. Lovely Kiss, Fake Out. The Ice Psychic typing is super good offensively. It's got great stats. It's usually going to have to be Sash, which isn't an issue on a team with this kind of composition. That mon could be surprisingly good. I do generally think it has competition with Mr. Mime Galar and Mr. Rhyme. Very similar move pool, similar niche, but I do like that it has the sleep option. Flygon is a mon that generally underperforms off the fact that its offensive stats are kind of lacking and its weaknesses are huge. But I actually do think it fits this comp quite nicely overall. I love Bronzong. I love Escavalier. Bronzong with Heat Proof is kind of important on this team, which isn't great. Because if you notice, there's a couple fire weaknesses with the Serena, the Escavalier, and the Jinx. So I feel like even though he might want to run Levitate some weeks, it's going to be hard to justify. I think that thing's going to be Heat Proof most of the time. And the other half of that difficulty comes from the Escavalier, which that's a 4x weak mon. And your Trick Room mode is basically going to be Escavalier, Bronzong, Wishy-Washy, which I don't love that. I think Bronzong is the best piece there, just because as strong as Escavalier is, it's very susceptible to just fire moves in general. It's hard to play around those. Heat Wave is on a lot of these teams, and I'm just worried about that thing's performance. Hitmonchan's one of the best Tier 5 options. Inner Focus Coaching is going to be ridiculous. I can definitely see that making a lot of good play. I do think this team overall is pretty solid in a lot of ways. I just feel like the top of the top mons on the draft don't have enough power for me. They offer great utility, but they're not providing utility for things that need it, is kind of my big thing with this comp.
Yeah, I think that was sort of my main problem with it. I think that the Togetic and the Crobat are very, very good tools for what they do. Super bulky redirection and incredibly reliable Tailwind are great things to have on a draft, but this team just doesn't do a very good job justifying those two pieces. In terms of justifying redirection, high tier redirection really wants to be on a team with a mixture of all out offense, something like a Cinderace, for example, that can just hit the field and do big damage right away, combined with some setup options, and I don't really see much of that here at all. I think you're mainly just going to be using Togetic to set up Trick Room. That's kind of the only thing it's going to be doing. It's hard to justify a slot that's basically just dedicated redirection if you want to do something like Dynamax Serena, or something like that. It just doesn't quite have the damage output to justify that. And like you were saying, Crobat as well. Like you want things that are going to be abusing Tailwind and putting out enough offense to justify having Crobat there, because sometimes the Crobat can be a little bit of a dead slot. It can sort of fall flat because it might not have a whole lot of stuff to do after it sets Tailwind for its partner. It's not really that offensive. It's mostly there for utility and speed. So in order to justify that, you need to have something really, really powerful that's putting out a lot of damage and that has a lot of good coverage. And I think the Serena and the Incineroar they're kind of almost there in terms of damage output and coverage, but it's not enough to justify putting Crobat on this team. Like the stuff like Crobat and Togetic, like they might be decent for the 3 turns that they're sitting next to the Maxmon, but you're not getting the full potential out of them, and it might be hard for you to keep your foot on the gas after your Dynamax is over. Now that being said, there are a couple of things I do like about this team. I'm a bigger fan of this Trick Room mode than I think you are, Ryan. I like the Wishy-Washy Escavalier combination. The type synergy there is really nice. That you have a slow, powerful water type to pair with this super fire weak Trick Room Sweeper and Escavalier. I actually really like Wishy-Washy in general. It's incredibly powerful before it reverts back to the solo form, and it only does that at the end of the turn, I believe. So even if you get hit unexpectedly and go down below 25%, you at least still get another move off before you switch back to your solo form. And then even if you're in your solo form, you have Endeavor, which is fun. I think it's kind of an underutilized Pokemon. I'm excited to see it work. And then as far as the Fire Water Grass Core goes, it is a decent bulky Fire Water Grass Core. I like the Serena Incineroar and the Wishy-Washy. They're capable of some offense, and they have a decent mix of utility and support. So kind of a mix of good and bad. There's some good stuff here. There's some good combinations, some mons I like. But yeah, the Togetic and Crobat, they would just be much better utilized on a different kind of team.
Yeah, to echo that sentiment, I think that every mon on this team is individually very strong, but in its tier as well. Maybe not the Incineroar, but that's a conversation for a different day. But yeah, Togetic is a value tier 2, Crobat is a value tier 3, and it goes down the line like that. I just think together they don't work as well together because you're missing that sort of, base 125 to 130 attacking stat, base 100 speed something. And if you have that, then this team is immediately busted. And I don't know what in tier 1 could fit that bill, but I'm sure something could. And if you want to drop Incineroar for that, I think this team looks a lot better. But with that being said, let's go ahead and cut ahead to the next team, which is the Dallas Delibirds. I'll go ahead and take this one. So the Delibirds went with a pretty standard sand mode with an Excadrill along with a Hippowdon. They also have a Braviary to deter Intimidate. They've got the Togedemaru, which will protect their Gyarados they have in the back. Cradily is a decent option here, along with Turtonator, Rapidash. Duraludon is pretty strong. Lopunny is a great tier 5 value, and then the Galarian Weezing. So there's a lot of things to like about this team. It is very physically offensive, but it does have the Braviary as the great Defiant Mon to go with it, and then the Duraludon is also very strong there. I like that they've got a couple different immunities set up. I think Galarian Rapidash is a pretty valued tier 5, along with the Lopunny. So I like a lot of what they're doing. If I did have some critiques for this team, though, it would be against things that have a lot of ground and rock coverage. There's the potential that just Max Quake hits a lot of the things on this team. Like, yeah, it doesn't hit the Braviary or the Gyarados, but that's it. It really hits everything else pretty hard, and those two are both weak to a Rock Slide or a Max Rockfall. So while I think this team is very synergistic, I see what they're doing. They've got a lot of good things going for them. I think their type weaknesses defensively, they're just missing good switch-ins to some of the most common attacking types in the game, and that's going to end up being one of their long-term biggest weaknesses, is the weakness to ground and rock type attacks. But what do you guys think about this team?
I found this team to be kind of one-dimensional, like you mentioned. It's very physically offensive. Like, I think it's very clear and very straightforward what this team wants to do. It just wants to sweep opponents with physical attackers, and Duraludon, of course, being kind of the lone special attacker here. It's good that there's a Braviary here. It does deter Intimidate on a lot of these other physical attackers, the Excadrill, Gyarados, Hippowdon, all that. But I don't think it's a good enough justification for this much physical offense, because there are so many other ways to mitigate physical damage as well. I think this team is going to see a lot of opponents using stuff like Max Steel Spike and Reflect and Will-O-Wisp and Charm and stuff like that. So even if you have an Intimidate deterrent, being this physically offensive is probably not a great idea. It has basically no Trick Room mode, which I find a little troubling. Like, the only setter here is the Galarian Rapidash, and the only Pokemon that are really going to be able to abuse Trick Room are like the Hippo and Cradily and Turtonator, and that's not exactly the most optimal Trick Room mode. That's assuming you even bring Rapidash to set it up, which you probably almost never will, if ever. I think the big takeaway mostly is just that the team needs quite a bit more versatility, and I think you can probably get that with a couple of transactions. There are some mons that I think you don't really need that much. The Cradily, I think, does have some legitimacy, but if you can give it up for something a little bit more especially offensive, or just something that helps the team do a little bit more, that's probably a good idea. You don't want to be accidentally clicking Gyarados' Max Geyser into your own Storm Drain anyway. And I think Wheezing is probably another thing that needs to go. I don't feel that it has much of a role here, and you're kind of just turning off your own abilities when you have this thing on the field. You want to abuse that sand. You want to intimidate things with Gyarados or get Moxie boosts. You want to be getting Defiant boosts with the Braviary. There's stuff here that needs those abilities, and I don't think Wheezing is doing much. I feel like the only reason it's here is to maybe stop like one or two other opposing modes that really rely on their abilities. But I think there are usually better ways than Wheezing to go about stopping that kind of stuff. So I think if this team makes the right transactions, it can definitely turn things around, because it does have some really powerful modes. It's just too straightforward, too one-dimensional. It just wants to do one thing a bit too much.
Yeah, this team, I talk about it a lot in a couple of MDL videos, but Quake Slide, man. Classic Earthquake Rock Slide combination. A lot of mons get those moves, and with the addition of Dynamax and Max Quake and Max Rockfall both being very solid options on most Pokemon that get that coverage, which is a lot of them, really hampers this team. One of my favorite picks is definitely the Cradily, actually. I think it's quite good. I actually see the Wheezing here being more used in a like Misty Terrain support role because I kind of think you want all your abilities on this team. Stalwart's really good, Lightning Rod's required, Defiance required, Sand Rush is required. Like every single Pokemon on this team wants their ability, so if you're using that Weezing, I feel like it's going to be more to set terrain or to just levitate and be an annoying Will-O-Wisp bot, basically. The big thing is that defensive synergy at the top is hugely important to me when I look at a team. And this team, at the very top, if the Excadrill and Duraludon are kind of two of the biggest threats, and then the Braviary and the Gyarados are the other two big threats. And between those Mons, you can hit them super effectively with only 2 move slots. That's very concerning. And then one of the best pieces of support to the team is a Togedemaru that's 4x weak. Now, can you run Air Balloon? Can you run Shucca Berries? Yeah, of course. I mean, and Charty Berries and whatever. You can tech for those weaknesses, sure, but it just means that in a game-to-game set, your opponent will then go, oh, this has this thing, so I can hit it with this instead. In a best of 3, that's those kind of defensive type synergies that don't mesh well, don't work out super well. I actually, if I was this player, I would probably consider dropping both the Weezing and the Duraludon. Try to keep those typings to an extent, like keep a Dragon type, keep a have something else instead of that Weezing, and try to make sure that it's some special attackers that don't share the top type core weaknesses, and similar stuff. I've seen Gyarados totally pop off in draft. I'm very excited to see if this coach can use it really well. That Mon is absolutely terrifying under the right hands. So I do think this team, its placement here is more so because its offensive modes are definitely present, and there is a lot of very clear-cut synergy. It's just that I'm personally mostly worried about the type weaknesses, and I think a few picks could be adjusted to make this like insanely threatening.
Yeah, I agree with all of that, but let's go ahead and take a look at House Luxray, our team that we have in the number 9 slot, I believe, with a power ranking of 8.67. Matt, why don't you give us a rough breakdown of House Luxray?
Okay, so the first thing I notice about this team is that I really like the Firewater Grass core, at least defensively. It's got great defensive synergy, great defensive types. The Ferrothorn Finian and the Rotom Heat combination. They're going to be really difficult to break through, especially with maybe something like screen support from Grimmsnarl. There's a lot of good synergy there. I can see these Mons switching in and out all over the place, and just providing really good synergy for each other. I kind of like some of these lower tier picks in the Audino and the Golurk especially. I personally would not have put these Pokemon in these tiers. I think Audino deserves to be tier 4, and I think Golurk actually deserves to be tier 3. So grabbing a couple of those is definitely a good idea. There's very good value there. And you do have kind of this normal and ghost type combination in this Trick Room mode. It seems like more of a secondary Trick Room mode because you also kind of have like Ferrothorn and Reuniclus up top in tier 2 and 3 there. So you can kind of mix and match those a little bit, but I think that the overall that makes the Trick Room mode a little bit better. It is a little bit tough to use Audino and Golurk in Trick Room because they're not quite that slow. But I think Golurk at least is going to have. I think it's going to have more offensive options than even these higher tier Trick Room Mons. The Reuniclus and Ferrothorn make a decent Trick Room mode, but they do have good speed stats for it. But they have kind of neutral synergy, and they don't have the greatest offensive coverage. I mean, Reuniclus does have a good special attack stat, but you're often pigeonholed into running some inaccurate moves like Thunder and Focus Blast, which is awkward. So there's some ups and downs when it comes to the Trick Room mode here. The main issue here is probably that I don't really see where a lot of damage output and sweeping potential is coming from. Aside from support from the Grimmsnarl, I think this team is probably going to be relying on that Grimmsnarl pretty heavily with for its speed control and offensive support. It's going to be really hard to leave Grimmsnarl with something like Thunderwave, Scary Face, Fake Tears on the bench ever. I think it kind of has to come almost all the time because Pokemon like Finny and Rotom, they're good at setting up and maxing if they get enough setup with enough HP left, but I think it's going to be a little bit difficult for this team to do that consistently, so which is why I say they're going to have to rely on the Grimmsnarl quite a bit. So that is a little bit of a concern personally, and I'm other than that, there's just not a huge amount of offense here. Something like Cinderace, like I mentioned before, something that just comes out, hits the field, and does big damage immediately. I don't really see anything like that here, and I don't really see really consistent, reliable ways to get the kind of setup that you need to make use of a big Dynamax sweeper.
Yeah, I can agree with a lot of that. I think defensively, this is one of the best teams in the draft. They have a lot of defensive synergy. Like you said, a massively strong core with the Ferrothorn, Feeny, and the Rotom Heat. But damage output is something I'm worried about. Like, Belly Drum, Greedent, and Trick Room is one of your best damage options. I guess Nasty Plot, Rotom Heat is a good damage option. The Unburdened Hawlucha if you can set up a Sword Stance. But that's a lot of stuff that takes work, and this team doesn't have redirection. And without getting that setup, the overall damage output of this team is really what has me concerned, because they're going to survive a lot, but are they able to punish you for not being able to pick up those Okos by KOing back themselves? Not a lot of the time. And if another team can get some momentum rolling, this team is not going to have the opportunity to grind them down as much. However, if House Luxray can start grinding teams down, I think they have that sort of suffocating playstyle potential where getting a small advantage, they could squeeze out into a win that takes, 15 or 20 turns instead of the normal 5 to 6 turn game. So I do think it's an interesting take on a draft and an interesting style moving forward, but just the overall damage potential has me a bit worried about this team. But what are your thoughts, Ryan?
Yeah, I'd agree. I think this reads to me as a very high skill cap team. This team is going to require a lot of skill to pilot well in order to make sure you can get those setups off consistently, and your prep is going to have to be really on point. Because everything on this team can set up. I mean, the Grimmsnarl can swagger, the Tapu Fini, the Pharaoh gets the Iron Defense Body Press set with Leech Seed, and it can just stall forever. Rennie over there gets Combined. You got Swords Dance on Lucha. You've got Prankster coaching with Riolu. And Lord, like Agility and Sword, and I think it gets SD, so I get something. Golurk can sweep with setup options. It's just that, if you have a setup option team, you really want some better redirection. I feel like this team is a little too heavy on the Grimmsnarl, and I feel like if those setups don't go off, this team really is going to struggle. I think if you have a very deft hand at piloting it, this team can, in its current state, absolutely kill somebody, but you have to play this team at such a high level so consistently compared to a couple of teams where you really don't have to play it at a very high level super consistently. You'll just kind of be able to click buttons and it'll work out fine. Just because something is more complicated does not mean that it's better. So that's my thoughts. I think this team could absolutely just demolish some people, but it's going to require some very precise play on the part of the opponent, and it's so precise that I'm worried that it's a little too much.
Ally Switch is your redirection.
Yeah.
Please no. But with that ominous message, let's go ahead and look at the Corporeal Crabhammers, which we have as the most variable team. I believe between the three of us, we had it in 3 different positions. and ranging anywhere from a top 5 team to a bottom 3 team. So there's a lot of dissension about how good this team is. But I'll give it a quick breakdown at first. You got Togekiss Tier 1, which it can be a little underwhelming as your top Tier 1, but we'll see what it does on the rest of this team. I think it's decent in this slot, if not great. And then you got a Trick Room mode. That's basically what you're looking at. You've got the Stack Attacker next to Togekiss, which can set up the Marowak, and that's going to be the main mode on this team. Outside of that, you've got the Hitmontop, which is a great support piece, the Noivern, another great support piece, Slurpuff. I kind of like it with the Indeedee. It might be a little underwhelming, but it is adorable, and I like Slurpuff. Lurantis has decent stats, and Contrary superpower is always nice, and in a Dynamax format it's got a little bit of extra value as a defensive piece, even if it's not as good as an offensive piece. The Shuckle to snipe the Chansey, respect for not letting Chansey Shuckle abominations plague this league. And then Dugtrio and Basculin, which I think are both decent value picks for the points that he had left in those slots. But this team will go as far as this Trick Room mode takes it. It's probably the most hard Trick Room in the league, would be my guess. Yes, Noivern can set Tailwind, but then we're struggling with the what is the Tailwind set for? Are you going to max Togekiss next to Noivern and then just die to ice moves? Are you going to send in Lurantis and have that be your big threat under Tailwind? Indeedee doesn't really get calcs, so I think the Trick Room mode is the big mode on this team, which I think has a lot of potential, and I am a fan of Marowak A in this format. But one thing on this team that makes me a little nervous is the Togekiss next to the Hitmontop. I think those are two mons that are very, very, very solid mons on the ladder, but lose a lot of their value in draft when you see them coming. So I'm nervous that those might be overvalued compared to the rest of this team, but the Trick Room potential here is just undeniably very good. But Matt, what are your thoughts on this one?
I liked this team a little bit more than you guys did. I found the Trick Room mode to be quite good. I think the setup here is very, very reliable. You have Togekiss next to Stack Attacker, which is fantastic. It does a great job of covering both of Stack's 4x weaknesses. You also have both Wide Guard and Fake Out from Hitmontop if you need to cover for something else while you're setting up Trick Room. Maybe a particularly powerful Earthquake, for example, that Togekiss can't redirect. And then I think offensively, the only real problem with this Trick Room mode is that there's a lot of physical attackers, but I think since the team overall is not too overwhelmingly physical, I don't think that's as big of a problem for this team as it was for the Sand team that we discussed previously, especially because there is also an Intimidate deterrent here that functions well next to the Marowak you have in Lurantis as the Grass type here. The one big thing I feel like this Trick Room mode is missing is a really solid Water type to pair with this Marowak and Lurantis. And I would also like to see maybe another different Trick Room setter other than the Stack and Indeedee that has some other kind of niche. Maybe a slow Ghost type like I believe Runerigus and Cofagrigus are both taken, but something like that's slow and immune to Fake Out, whereas Indeedee is immune to Fake Out since it sets up the terrain, but it's not that slow and it's going to have a hard time functioning inside of Trick Room once it's set up. And then I think a Water type is something you definitely need, or just something as far as Trick Room setters go, something that might have another particular niche. My brain went to Water type because I was thinking of Slowking, because it has Oblivious and it's immune, so it's immune to taunt. So that's something else it can provide. So I think there might be some overlapping type weaknesses if there was a Slowking on this team, but it might end up being worth it. I definitely like the Slowking with the Marowak and the Lurantis, but and I also like the fact that it's not just super hard Trick Room. I think I valued the Slurpuff and DD mode and the Togekiss Hitmontop mode a little bit more than you guys did as well. I suppose it's possible that the problem with Indeedee's calcs or the predictability of the Togekiss and Hitmontop self bullet punch stuff is going to be more of a problem than I would have expected, but we'll only time will tell. But I definitely think that this is a strong team with a lot of good damage output, a decent variety of different modes. I think with a couple of transactions, this team could end up being really, really good. I think you probably want to drop the Noivern for something else, because it's kind of the only major piece here that I don't really see a whole lot of value in. I don't really see how it fits here. So that's my 2 cents. Ryan, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I do agree with you. I feel like between all three, I was kind of the most in the middle. The Trick Room is very convincing. I don't like that it's mostly physical attackers, though. I do think that one of the other part is that I'm actually just not so high on Togekiss, because I actually do think that Trick Room Denial is going to be simpler on this team if Togekiss is not on the field with the Stakataka, or I guess the Indeedee, but you'd probably leave that, because my issue is that Stakataka and Indeedee, neither of which are naturally immune to taunt, so you have to run a wider, and then the Staka has a 4x weakness to several types, and Indeedee's not too crazy to one-hit KO. So my problem is that, in my mind, the most consistent Trick Room setup is that Togekiss Stakataka, which I still think can get beat by some taunt stuff. And my other issue with that is that I don't like the Togekiss in the Trick Room by itself, because I have found that Togekiss relative to Togetic does not get the defensive calcs you want it to. I found that, like, for example, Togekiss, with its sky-high special defense and whatever, you can run Wakanberry on it with, like, Spadef Nature and HP and whatever. It still has a chance to die from, like, a Zapdos Max Lightning, which, like, that's obviously kind of a niche calc, but if we're talking, like, this Mon with full invest is dying to a very solid tier 1 hit, and then it just loses its utility, I'm worried about that, because it has a lot of type weaknesses. Being weak to ice, steel, electric, all those things is not great. Granted, the Marowak covers a bit with the Lightning Rod ability. And Indeedee Slurpuff I'm not as sold on as a mode, because I'm running Indeedee F Slurpuff right now, and I've thought about getting cheeky with it and trying to do, Indeedee Slurpuff shenanigans. And I was literally in a damage calculator yesterday looking at it, and Indeedee F is weaker than Indeedee Male, but I can't imagine a difference of more than like 15-20%, and that's still not enough, because Dynamax in of itself nerfs Expanding Force spam, because the Mon is defensively getting so bulky. So even Fake Tears Expanding Force usually doesn't pick up Oak Hose on a lot of big Dynamax threats that teams will have. I do think this team is going to win some battles just off the virtue of how strong it is. That Trick Room mode is, and there's a couple teams that are quite weak to Trick Room that I think it's just going to completely roll through. I'm just not convinced that it has much outside of that Trick Room mode, because I'm not as sold on the other modes. I'm not super sold on Togetic. I don't like that Togetic is typically going to be in a support role on this team. It can be offensive. I don't think it will be most weeks. And yeah, I think trading Noivern is kind of a no-brainer. I think Noivern should be something kind of like what you were saying, a ghost type, or something else that just operates in TR would be nice there. There's a couple good tier 3 TR mods that you could probably slot in there and it'd do pretty well.
I think I'm gonna stick up for Togekiss' versatility here a little bit. I think it's very it's totally viable to go with a more offensive Togekiss and still use it to help set up your Trick Room mode. You can easily use either a weakness policy set or like a Crit Kiss, and just fill one of the move slots with Follow Me. And even if you're not super bulky, you only really need that redirection for one turn while you're setting the Trick Room, and then if your lack of bulk causes your Togekiss to go down, that's probably fine because you get a free switch into, let's say, the Marowak. And then in another game, you can switch modes completely and just go with a fast mode with the Dynamax Togekiss. So I'm seeing some stuff like that happening from time to time, and that kind of versatility does excite me a little bit. But at the same time, I am also very aware of how much weaker Togekiss is these days compared to previous VGC formats. It lost a lot. It's been losing a lot over time with each DLC release, but it lost quite a bit when we got the power creep with Crown Tundra. So that could be a factor as well.
Yeah, overall, like I was saying, this is a really interesting team that I expect to perform well, and there are a couple Pokemon that I'm very interested to see the sets that come out of them. I do think it's got some unique techs that we are potentially overlooking that could come out pretty early in the season and really change our perception of this team. But with that being said, we've got the Jubilife City Jirachis. They are a pretty unique team. They've got a solid rain mode with Politoed Kingdra and also the Rillaboom to defend it. But Ryan, why don't you give us a breakdown of this team first?
Yeah, so this team is quite good in a lot of ways. I like a lot of the pieces here. So the main thing this team has going for it really is its main offensive is going to be offensive power is going to come from that Rillaboom, that Metagross, and that Kingdra. And this team really just boils down to how well those tools are utilized, I think. The Rillaboom is just a solid mod. I mean, I've used it twice in Draft League. It's done very well for me in the past. Fake Out, Grassy Glide terrain is insane. He can proc his Metagross with Bulldoze into grassy terrain, so it gets nerfed to the point where it's not just murdering your Metagross, which is great. He has the Rain to kind of nerf damage for the Metagross. He has the Tailwind for the Talonflame that helps the Metagross. Scrafty's a nice partner for it as well. He's got his own rain mode with the Kingdra Politoed. Manectric is a nice lightning rod user here. I think generally the low tier picks are good. Rabombi is something a lot of people sleep on. It's actually quite good. Haunter's one of the better tier 5 options available. Caracosta, I think, is actually the one thing I think is a little misplaced on this draft. I would have preferred to have seen some other mon in that slot. I got it can Shell Smash, and its Shell Smash set is pretty solid, but just not super sold. Sturdy's a nice ability too. And then Mawile is a great tier 5 mon. One of the things that held this team back in my mind is there's not really a TR mode at all, which is very worrying because we've listed a lot of teams already with TR modes, and a lot of the top teams have it. The only thing here that operates super well in TR is Scrafty, which has me a little worried. Scrafty and Mawile, which if you're relying on a tier 3 and a tier 5 for your TR answers, that's a little worrying. I don't even think this team has a setter, which, unless someone correct me if I'm wrong on that, but I'm pretty sure I'm not. Then the other thing is actually, and Dan and I were talking about this a bit before the video, but if rain does not go up, this team actually does struggle a bit with offensive power. Because if rain doesn't go up, or rain is stopped, or if someone just clicks Max Flare and takes the nerf damage for a turn, then all of a sudden a lot of things happen. All of a sudden that Metagross is super threatened by sun-boosted attacks. Kingdra's base offensive stats are actually not as good as you would think they are. Base 95 isn't super strong. So if it can't click Max Geysers, it's really kind of hurting for damage sometimes. And I think there's a little bit too much funneling into the Metagross kind of as a result of all of this. And I think that those two things are really what kept this team back for me. I think it's a very good team overall. And I do think like Metagross is just going to sweep because that's what Metagross does. But there was just a couple of things here and there that I was like, little susceptible on how consistent some of this will be. That said, though, with a team this bulky, the TR issue isn't as big as you might think, just because of the raw bulk on some of these mons, kind of helping mitigate that a bit. Matt, what do you got?
Well, for the record, Haunter can set Trick Room.
Good. I'm glad.
Yeah, that doesn't count. Frankly, when I'm looking at like, is there a Pokemon that fills blank role? And it turns out that there's a tier 5 that's the only thing that fills that role. It doesn't count.
True. That is fair.
So anyway, but I do agree with a lot of the stuff you said. It's the comp is definitely very strong for what it is, and it's very strong if it gets to control the board state and the weather in particular. Obviously, Metagross definitely enjoys being on a rain team, and Rillaboom can help push water types aside that the rain mode can't hit very hard, and it likes the rain because it's not being hit as hard by fire moves, and the synergy here is pretty clear and pretty obvious. But yeah, like you said, it's pretty straightforward what this team wants to do exactly, kind of like the Delibirds with their sand mode. I do think this is a stronger draft than that one, but it's definitely lacking in diversity. It feels like most or all of the offense is very concentrated in just 3 Pokemon, in that Metagross, Kingdra, and Rillaboom. I think that's going to be the main drawback here of this draft. It's sort of just easy to well, maybe not easy, but it's very obvious what you're prepping for. As a side note, I also felt like some of the low tier picks didn't really fit all that well. Particularly like the Caracosta, which you mentioned. I think it seems kind of superfluous here. You don't really need another Swift Swim sweeper, even if you can pull some shell smash shenanigans with it. The Manectric I don't really see being very useful here. It can abuse thunder and rain, I guess, but there are better electric types that can do that, and I don't really see this as a team that needs a lightning rod user. So
right,
those picks they're okay. They do some stuff, some good stuff on this team. I just suspect there might be some better options out there. What do you think, Dan?
Yeah, I think the way I would sum up this team is saying that it is powerful but straightforward. Like, it does one thing really well, and that's have rain to support Metagross and Rillaboom. And it does that really well, and that's a really strong strategy that's going to win a lot of games. But if you are able to build against that, the secondary and tertiary modes of this team really make me nervous. The Ribombee is decent, the Haunter is decent, the Mawile decent, but if something is able to consistently stop Rillaboom Metagross, then this team's gonna struggle, especially if you're able to get up Sun against this team. Then they're really going to struggle, both for damage and both of their main attackers are going to be pretty weak as well. So I think having this team right around the middle of the pack is right. I wouldn't be surprised if they won just bunches and bunches of game off the power of their really strong central core, but I also wouldn't be surprised if they lost quite a few because someone's able to bring the tech to sort of stop their main mode, and then their secondary modes just don't really line up. But with that being said, the team ranked right above them is the Allurine Alcremies. Matt, why don't you go ahead and take this one first?
I think this team is kind of kind of similar to the Jirachis team in that there are some pretty clear modes that you're going to be prepping for. A few of these mons in the top tier core here were seem to be copy pasted from one of our drafts this season in the MDL with the Dragapult, Clefairy, and the Blastoise, but with the addition of a Terrakion there, mostly for a beat up mode with Dragapult. You have some very clear combos up here. Like I said, the beat up Dragapult onto Justified Terrakion. You have Dragapult Clefairy, which isn't so much of like it's not any kind of a setup or self-hitting combination. You could use Dragon Dance, I suppose, but most of the time you just see those two hit the field. Dragapult Dynamaxes and does damage while Clefairy redirects. That's mostly all there is to it. And then you have the Shell Smash Blastoise next to Clefairy with redirection as well. So there's some pretty clear modes here that opponents are going to be prepping pretty hard for, and they're definitely very strong, and they work well because a couple of these Pokemon can be used in multiple different modes. I feel like the rest of the draft it's not bad, but it does it has me scratching my head a little bit. There seems to be some mediocre to neutral synergy in the mid to low tiers. I think I would have liked to see a higher tier Firewater Grass Core. Instead, it's using the Maractus and Flareon here, which I don't really see them being used much. There's a Cofagrigus sitting here without a Trick Room mode, which is a curious decision. I'm not really sure what it's meant to be doing there, other than maybe like imprison Trick Room. But then there are other Pokemon that can do that can also be a little bit more useful after you've already clicked imprison. Outside of Trick Room, I don't know, the only thing Cofagrigus is really going to be useful for is like maybe Iron Defense Body Press stuff. But I think if you wanted Imprison Trick Room, there were probably better options for that. And I don't think, as far as like slow Pokemon here, the slowest things that you're going to be using inside of Trick Room are probably going to be like the Flareon and Scizor, and those are base 65 speed. That's not really a Trick Room mode, especially since Scizor largely relies on priority anyway. It doesn't really, if it's bullet punching, it doesn't really care whether it's in Trick Room or not. Some of the middle tier Pokemon are it's hard to really identify what the thought process behind picking some of them was. Maybe the Scizor is just there for the steel typing. That could be a possibility. But yeah, it's good modes up top, and the middle to low tiers, they're okay. They can do some stuff. It's not super clear what exactly they want to do, and the Cofagrigus, more than anything else, the Cofagrigus kind of has me scratching my head.
Yeah, I can agree with a lot of that. This team probably has the scariest lead options in the league that you have to be ready for. Like, you have to be ready for a beat-up Terrakion, you have to be ready for just the Dragapult attack, you have to be ready for Shell Smash Blastoise, you have to be ready for Purloin next to Blastoise fake tiering something. So, up front, this team is definitely very scary. However, I do think it's a little weird in the back. The Heliolisk, the Scizor, the Maractus, and the Flareon, whatever's behind the scary lead, I don't know if it has the same kind of cleaning ability as a lot of other top-level teams, the ability to just come out at the end and clean up whatever's left in the back. Maybe Scarf Terrakion in the back with a lot of sets could be really good for this team, but it just seems a little top-heavy to me. Like, it's a really good top-heavy, don't get me wrong there, but I'm a little nervous about how the bottom-tier mons will perform. What about you, Ryan?
Yeah, pretty much the same. One thing you guys haven't mentioned that I actually quite like about this team, uh, the Purloin was a really good pick. It's very value in tier 4. I like Diglett as another beat up user if you're desperate. Um, well, and the other thing is that simply the fact that Dragapult and Blastoise can both run support sets really kind of helps expand out this top core. The fact that the Blastoise could be like fake out Aqua Jet for the Terrakion, or you could have a Surf Pult with Breaking Swipe and Thunder Wave and Will-O-Wisp and stuff like that. Like that alone does help this team out a lot. That's part of the reason why it is where it is. But it is too top heavy, I think, in my opinion. I think some of those mid tier picks are a little too middling. A lot of the ones that you guys have talked about. And I am a little worried about what happens after the big threat goes down. That's a huge concern for me with this comp. So, just in general agreement, just wanted to throw in a little bit of, I do like that the top core not only is, it's a little top heavy, but at least the top heaviness is versatile.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. But moving on, we've got your team. Now, your team's pretty interesting. You've got the Kartana, Mimikyu, Araquanid, Jolteon, Unpheasant or Unfezant, depending on where you're from, Torracat, Spiritomb, Latios, Nidoking, Sirfetch'd the God, and Delibird. So, first things first, this is a bird team, not Delibird, the Sirfetch'd team. That faces a terrifying face, and it knows that it's in charge of this bird team. But on a more serious note, I think you've got a lot of really good value for a lot of your picks. Torracat, I think, is maybe the best tier 4. I really like that pick on your part. Jolteon with 130 speed and 110 special attack, really strong in tier 3. Araquanid, great trick room sweeper in tier 3. Mimikyu, very consistent setter. Kartana, I'm less sold on in draft. Heat Wave is not your friend, and while you have some fire resists, like, Heat Wave still takes out max AV Kartanas a lot of the time. So I am a little nervous about the Kartana against anyone that does tech that against you. The Nidoking, I think, does a decent chunk of damage, and I really like the Latios for the extra bulk, be able to set Tailwind, have a good support move pool, and a good offensive move pool. Overall, I think this team has a lot of depth. It has a lot of strengths as well, but there's nothing that screams overwhelming about it to me. Like the highest offensive stat you have is probably the Kartana's 181, obviously, but outside of that, it might be the Sirfetch'd, it might be the Araquanid. Like, I'm a little nervous about overall damage production from this team, while those two both have abilities and items that help them with the damage production. There's a lot of good support options, a lot of good speed control options, a lot of good value options, but it might not have the power to punch through some of the more defensive teams. But Matt, what are your thoughts on Ryan's team?
I'm not super concerned about damage output here. But I am concerned about sweeping potential. This, at first glance, this draft kind of just seemed like an assortment of attackers. I didn't really see a whole lot of support, offensive support in particular. Obviously, Torracat is pretty much completely support, but it's more of a defensive piece. I'd be a little bit concerned that you might be pigeonholed into using more supportive sets on Pokemon like Jolteon and Latias. But that's kind of the main the main gripe I had with the offensive nature of this team. You do have good type distribution. You have some decent speed control options if you're willing to use some move slots on them, which I imagine you probably will on Jolteon and Latias in particular. And as for the Trick Room mode, I do kind of like the Trick Room mode. I think Araquanid is definitely very good value for a tier 3 mon. My only concern really is that your offense inside of Trick Room is sort of lacking. Not so much that Araquanid has poor damage output, because it doesn't, but more because it relies on one single type to do that damage. So if you're running into something that you need to break through with your Trick Room mode, but that particular mon takes water attacks really well, you're gonna have a bad time. And Mimikyu has a hard time really being useful in Trick Room. It's a very reliable setter. Disguises is an incredible ability, but it doesn't. I don't think it really has any way to support the Araquanid once you're inside Trick Room, and it's of course not very slow, which to me is always a little bit awkward. So, other than that, yeah, I think I agree with a lot of the stuff Dan said, but yeah, it seems like a decent assortment of attackers with good synergy, type synergy in particular. I might just look for something else to bolster the Trick Room mode a little bit, or add some more offensive support.
Ryan, what are your thoughts on your team without giving too much away? Are you happy with the result? Are you upset with the result? What is your sort of prognosis looking at the season?
So so first off, full transparency. I did take this team over from another coach, and I had to do a lot of transactions with what was left on the board by the time it got to me, which was nothing. There was very little for me to work with here. So what I kind of chose to do was make a team that was a bit more experimental. A lot of these mons that I've worked on a lot of draft tier lists, and the Lotties, Nidoking, Araquanid, Katana are all mons that have come up as being very difficult to tier when I make those kind of tier lists. So I'm kind of attempting to try out some of these mons and just see how they perform. I do think I do think this is probably one of the worst teams I've ever drafted. Just gonna throw that out there. I know that sounds rude if I'm at 5th or whatever, but I don't love this team very much. I do think it will perform well, though. I do think that there's a couple hidden things you guys haven't chatted about yet, which is totally fine. I would prefer those stay hidden for now. And I am a little bit I'm optimistic is how I'm going to put it. The more that I am looking at this team, the more I'm kind of doing some pre-preparation calculations, the more I'm liking it. We'll see how well it actually performs in game, but I think it'll do moderately well.
All right, fantastic. Well, let's take a look at the next team, which is Sam Wakeman's Great Lakes Grimmsnarls in the Great Lakes Draft League. Sam is the owner of the league, and Matt, I'm going to give you the opportunity to break this team down for us.
So I had a little bit of trouble making sense of some of this team. There are certain parts that I totally get. For example, the the Thievel Coco is something that Dan popularized in a couple of different leagues now. So I totally get what that mode is doing. I think it's a powerful pick, especially with Thievel as a tier 4. I like the Dragon Fairy Steel Core with the Garchomp Coco and the Corviknight. That also simultaneously covers the other core, Dan, that you mentioned in one of your draft guide videos. I believe that was Ground Flying and Electric. Am I correct on that?
Yes, you're correct on that.
Okay, so it covers both of those at the same time, so that's pretty cool. I can definitely see them working pretty well together. I kind of sort of like the Firewater Grass Core. It's they're all. I mean, it has some decent mons. I'm a little bit skeptical of the Clawitzer a little bit, but Blaziken and Rotom-Mow are individually definitely strong Pokemon. But I think as a group, this Firewater Grass Core is a little bit awkward. A lot of the time I see players kind of just drafting like just any fire Pokemon, any grass Pokemon, any water Pokemon, and calling that a fire, water, grass core. I don't really think that's what happened here. This is still better than a lot of the fire, water, grass cores I've seen where people are doing that without thinking very much. But it is, I think, usually you want your type cores to be a little bit similar in what they're doing, and I just don't really see this group working together all that well, especially with the Clawitzer. It's kind of hard to see how the Clawitzer is going to help work with the other two and help support them. And even the Rotom and the Blaziken are they're going to be okay together, but it's a little bit awkward when the Rotom is more bulky support or bulky offense, maybe a setup mon, whereas Blaziken is kind of just this speed boost, get up and go, do damage kind of Pokemon. Most of the time, if you have something like a Blaziken, you want to pair it with a set of more offensive water and grass types, so you can kind of just put two of them on the field. They synergize well, and they can pick up some good KOs at the same time and support each other with their offensive synergy. But this Fire, Water, Grass core just seems a little bit weird to me. It's not obvious how exactly they're going to work together. The last thing I'm sort of wondering about is what exactly the role of Gothitelle is here. There's not really that much of a Trick Room mode here. I mean, maybe Corviknight and Clawitzer can kind of function in Trick Room, but their speeds aren't really that great for it. There is Sudowoodo with a base 30 speed, but it's not exactly it doesn't exactly have the best damage output in the world. Other than that, I mean, maybe it's just there to trap things in while its partner Dynamaxes and scores KOs without worrying about defensive switches from the opponent. But I also don't see a lot of stuff here that's necessarily going to be able to take advantage of that. Maybe the Garchomp, maybe the Blaziken, but it's sort of like the Cofagrigus that we talked about a couple of slides ago. I think it's better placed here than the Cofagrigus is on that team, but I'm wondering about what exactly its role is here. It doesn't really seem obvious to me.
Yeah, looking at these top teams, I know we're starting to get pretty nitpicky because these are all very solid teams at this point. I believe the Gothitelle is there for Imprison Trick Room because he doesn't have another good way to deny Trick Room or fight inside of Trick Room, and he recognizes that. But I think that being his best answer to Trick Room is what caused me to dock this team a little bit. Like, it is very solid, it's got powerful threats, it's got some good synergies. Clawitzer on electric terrain I actually kind of like a bit, so I see a lot of what this team is doing, but it does seem Trick Room soft, or ambivalent Trick Room at best. Like, people are going to run Trick Room against him a lot of the season, and if they're able to take out the Gothitelle, they're going to be able to get it up pretty consistently, and his bulk for outbulking the Trick Room I think is suspect at best. The Thievul will do a pretty good job of that, but otherwise I think Trick Room is going to be an effective strategy against this team, which is pretty, we're getting, like I said, pretty nitpicky at this part in the draft. But Ryan, what do you think about the Grimmsnarls?
I like the Goth is also the fake out user for this team, which I think is fine, but it's notable. Poltegeist feels a little misplaced. Cryogonal has some good utility moves, and for tier 5 it's fine. It covers the mistyping. I don't have any complaints about that. Sudowoodo fits this team shockingly well. I actually like it. As someone using Blaziken right now, I do have to admit I'm a little concerned about using Blaziken without redirection. Just because I know doing calcs for it, because I've been calcing for it for half a season now of the MDL. It is so frail, and even at your +2 or whatever, you're still sometimes missing Okos on big mons, is what I've been finding. So I'm a little concerned about the Blaziken not having that redirection support. I feel like it would have appreciated it. And because there's no other fake out in the Gothitelle, unless you're getting Blaziken Gothitelle, I don't see a way for you to stop your opponent from just double targeting down. And that's actually just one of my general concerns with the team is when an opponent just doubles down on it. I'm a little worried about what happens if Garchomp gets doubled down or the Coco gets doubled down, that kind of thing. I think the modes are quite good, and it's got a ton of power, and we obviously all unanimously ranked it 4th. But those are kind of the big concerns I have going in, outside of the TR stuff.
Yeah, I can definitely agree with that. I think very solid team. Will pick up quite a few wins this year. Will likely be competing for playoffs or maybe even a bye into the playoff spot. So I think Sam should be pretty happy with this team. But with that being said, I will go ahead and take the rolled gold pretzels. I'll just call them the pretzels from this point out. I like this team. I like this team a lot, mostly because I like Celesteela and Primarina next to Raichu. Celesteela is very powerful, only has 2 weaknesses, one of which is electric that Raichu helps to deal with, and one of which is fire that Primarina helps to deal with. Raichu can also trigger the Celesteela's weakness policy with a Volt Switch. It can also trigger Primarina's weakness policy with a Volt Switch as well. Primarina's got the spread attacks. Celesteela's got some very powerful single target attacks. Primarina doesn't need a Dynamax, but can. Same with the Celesteela. Now looking at the rest of this team, Buzzwole exists. It's very weak to flying type attacks, but I know Gumi really wanted to have a Buzzwole team, and this is what he came up with for it. So I'm excited to see what he does with it this season, and if it ends up being one of the best mons in the league, I wouldn't be shocked, and that would make this the best team in the league. And if it ends up falling flat, I wouldn't be shocked, and that would make this more a middle tier team. So I think that's a big swing mon. I also think the Trick Room mode on this team is underrated. The Runerigus and the Drampa combined are going to be really powerful options against a lot of things. Drampa is super underrated with the Berserk ability. It has a really high base special attack, base 36 speed, lets it underspeed a lot of things under Trick Room. Now, the few areas where people might dock this team, the Aerodactyl seems a little out of place on this team, especially next to the Celesteela and Primarina. Raichu can do a lot of work with Lightning Rod, but at some point the Raichu's work is gonna it's gonna max out on what it can redirect, and once the Raichu goes down, a lot of his top tier mons are weak to electric type attacks. And the Heatmore is a really weird pick. I know there's a real shortage on fire types, and Heatmore has some potential, I agree, but I don't know if that was the pick for that tier 5 slot. But I know that sounds pretty nitpicky. The top end of this team is fantastic, and I do play him week 1, so I'm not going to go too much into any other sets, but I will just pass this off to Matt. Matt, what do you think about the pretzels?
Yeah, I'm probably just going to end up echoing some of the same points that you made. The top tier combinations here with the Celesteela, Primarina, and Raichu, those are some great mons. There's particularly with the Celesteela, Primarina, there's a lot of bulk and a lot of power there. The Raichu supports both of them very, very well. There's great synergy between the three. I actually think I like the Aerodactyl a little bit more than you do, Dan. I think it really helps give this team a solid fast mode, whereas it didn't really have one otherwise. Like, it's definitely viable to use both Celesteela and Primarina in either Trick Room or Tailwind. I know, Dan, you've been using Tailwind with Primarina in the MDL this season, and I have myself a Celesteela over in the MDL as well, and I can tell you that outspeeding things when you get that thing going with Beast Boost is really, really nice. You get some max air streams, you get a Tailwind up in there, and suddenly the base 61 speed is not looking so bad. So I do like the combination of Tailwind and Trick Room here. Aerodactyl, definitely a very reliable Trick Room setter. Or, I'm sorry, Tailwind setter. It's not quite as reliable as let's say a Crobat. It is the same speed, but it doesn't have that added bit of insurance that is Inner Focus. But Fast Tailwind is tends to be pretty reliable. I also, like you, I also like the Trick Room mode here. A Drampa's something that I've been wanting to see really good, consistent use of Drampa. I've seen a few people draft it before, but it doesn't really come all that often, and when it does, like, sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not. I think it actually has a lot of untapped potential that I haven't really seen yet, and I think it could work pretty well on this team. You end up with kind of a nice normal and ghost type combination here with the Trick Room mode with the Runerigus and the Drampa, and the Drampa being a Dragon type also should work pretty nicely in Trick Room with that Steel and Fairy typing up top in those high tier spots there. Since you said we're getting nitpicky, I'll get a little bit nitpicky with some of the tier 4s. Tier 5 is I find a little bit more forgivable. I don't really care that there's a Heatmor there. It's probably not coming. Maybe there's some Gumi's got some secret plan with it. I don't know. We'll see, but I kind of doubt it. As far as the tier 4s go, I generally like Togepi as a tier 4 redirector. I just don't really see a whole lot of opportunity for it to be abused here. I don't see a ton of setup options. I feel like it's mainly going to be used for setting up Trick Room, but that's also fine. I mean, it's a tier 4 slot, and it's also, if it's used for Trick Room setup, it also has like a base 20 speed, I think. So if you maybe put a couple of support moves on there, you get Trick Room set up. Even if it doesn't go down, it can still sit in Trick Room and pull some shenanigans probably. And then the Kangaskhan I like a little bit less than the Togepi. Kangaskhan, I'm not generally a big fan of it. I feel like you're basically just filling that one slot with a scrappy fake out, because Kangaskhan feels like almost kind of useless on turn 2, because scrappy fake out is kind of its only little unique gimmick. I don't really think it's great for damage output. Maybe it has a couple of decent support moves. I don't know. Gumi, prove me wrong. Make Kangaskhan good. I don't know. I'm not really big on Kangaskhan. And then lastly, there's the Buzzwole here, which I know Gumi was really hyped about taking. It is a cool mon. I really do want to see it work. I've only seen somebody draft it in Generation 8 once, and it never hit the field, and it was traded away after just a few weeks. So that was kind of disappointing. So I'm hoping that Gumi can make good use of it here. I'm kind of with Dan on this one. If the Buzzwole ends up being really good, I'm gonna really enjoy that. I'm gonna like seeing it. It's gonna be really cool. If it doesn't, I'm not gonna be too surprised, because it's a mon it's going to be hard to make it work, especially with any consistency. And I'm also a little bit skeptical that it fits here onto this team composition. But we'll see. I hope it works out.
Okay, my turn. One thing that we haven't talked about yet that I'm just going to kind of open with here. The top 3 were actually a tie prior to recording, because we literally all had a different 1, 2, and 3. I'll be honest and say I did have this as my top team prior to recording, mostly off the backing of the fact that I liked the Trick Room mode. I liked that it had a Tailwind setter. I think the Steeler Raichu Primcore is solid synergy. One thing you guys haven't mentioned is Octillery, which I actually think complements the Trick Room mode quite well. Because it's got 105 special attack. I think it still gets Water Spout, doesn't it?
I believe so.
So if it still gets Water Spout, that's like, Runerigus goes down, and then you throw in the Artillery and Click Specs Water Spout off 105 special attack, which that's pretty good for the value. I think Togepi is also here to help Buzzwole not just die. I think that's part of its role.
Could be, yeah.
My only real complaint about this team, like the one thing that kind of stuck out to me, is Runerigus and Aerodactyl are the Trick Room setter and Tailwind setter respectively, and they both are weak to ice. And I really don't love that because the redirection for those, and they're both weak to water as well. And like, I don't love that because the redirector here is Togepi. So I'm a little concerned about consistency of clicking those moves. I do generally like Aerodactyl, and one thing you guys have not mentioned yet that this team has that I don't think almost any other team has in the league, Aerodactyl gets the ability Unnerve, which I have been finding more and more to be one of the best abilities in VGC Draft, because a lot of the time this team will be hitting a lot of things for super effective damage, and a lot of people are going to be like, oh, I need to tech a Koba Berry, or I need to tech up a Berry Berry or whatever. He can just toss in Aerodactyl and your Berry Berry is totally useless, and he can just one-hit KO you. And the fact that that option exists on a team like this, I think is actually super, super, super valuable. I actually do think that will come into play. The other reason I like this team is I think it just does super well in a best-of-3 setting. He can switch between Trick Room and Tailwind very easily. He can switch whether the Steel is the main attacker, or the Prim, or the Buzzwole, or the Drampa. Like, he can just swap what he's doing in-game so easily with very minimal requirement to spread and calc. I think this team's going to do really, really well. I'm super impressed with all three, the top 3 teams.
Yeah, for sure. I hadn't really thought too much about the Unnerve, but yeah, I think that's a really good point. It's really it's a really good tool to have in draft. And also speaking of
this team in particular.
Oh, for sure, yeah. And speaking of Aerodactyl, it does have access to Dragon Dance now in this generation. That's not something I've seen anyone use in draft yet. Please use Togepi with Dragon Dance Aerodactyl and then max the Aerodactyl. I want to see it, please.
Once.
Yeah, just once. That's all I need.
Okay, well, we will look forward to that happening once, maybe against me week 1. We'll see. But speaking of me, Ryan, why don't you handle my team?
Okay, so this team is weird as hell.
Yes.
I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. This is a weird fucking team. I like a lot of the stuff on it, but it is weird. So first off, this team, I think, is mostly top 3 off of the backs of 5 good mons carrying it. Indeedee with the Indeedee F, Zapdos G, Arcanine, Azu, Crook is a ridiculous top core. That sold me on the team, to be blunt. Zapdos G is something that I've been using a bit, and I'm finding that it's very, very powerful, and it's especially powerful on a comp with Indeedee like this, because one of the main ways that you get around them on like Indeedee with redirection, especially with Zapdos, is you just be like, oh, well, I just Icy Wind it. It's like, okay, activate my Defiant. And there's a lot of the team is very physical, but because the main offensive threat is a Defiant user, is terrifying. You've got double Intimidate, you've got the Arcanine sitting here with Justified, and potential weakness policy proc off a non-huge power Azu with Aqua Jet. Azumarill alone can just destroy a team. I mean, God, Azu's just insane. Crocodile is one of the best tier 3s, period, that was available in the draft. You've got a Trick Room mode with the Slowbro Delmise. Delmise is cool because it gets 3 stab moves, which is kind of neat. I actually haven't seen Slowbro G used a whole lot in draft, but the fact that you have an Expanding Force spam user as your TR setter, as well as it being one of the slows, I think is super, super good. The slow, any of the Slowbro forms or variants play very nicely with Indeedee, and I do think it was the right call to go for the Poison type Galar farm over the over one of the water type ones on this particular composition. Aurorus and Glaceon are going to click Blizzard. And Refrigerate Aurorus has proven to be shockingly good in MBL. Gets some pretty insane calcs. Magneton's one of the best tier 5 mons. Magnet Pull is a pretty solid ability, if not Sturdy's good. It's got really nice stats. Its Eviolite set is fine. And then Sliggoo is bulky annoyance, really. So this team just has a lot of like very, very good. Like the top 5 mons sell it for me. I'm not sure how good everything else is going to be though. Like I legitimately just don't know. Will the Trick Room mode work? I don't know. Will the Hail mode work? I don't know. And those questions are kind of the big question marks. If you can make that Hail mode and that Trick Room mode work really well for you, this is the best team in the league. If you can't, then this team is kind of mid of the pack, potentially. But I am fairly optimistic in their odds, seeing as this was a consensus rank too.
Yeah, I agree that the top 5 mons are really nice, and I'm sort of gonna throw Delmise into the mix there to make it sort of a top 6 with the Indeedee, Zapdos, Arcanine, Azumarill, Krookodile, and Delmise, just so that you have your Fire, Water, Grass core in that group. You have a lot of you have a great type distribution. I think that's one of the most striking things that I found, at least when first looking at this draft. There's a lot of versatility, defensive synergy. You have Intimidate options, and I say options because it's always nice to have the option to not run Intimidate if you happen to be going up against some stuff that will abuse opposing Intimidate. But I also think that your Hail mode is pretty high value for tier 4. I don't know, like kind of like Ryan, I don't know how well the Hail mode is going to do, but it looks fun, it looks cool. I hope it comes out. The Trick Room mode, I might have a little bit more faith in the Trick Room mode than Ryan, but also like Ryan, I am somewhat skeptical. Delmise is not a thing that I've seen in draft too much, but it clearly has potential. Slowbro, I'm a little bit skeptical of, because it's hard not to compare it to the Kanto variant, and this one is just stat-wise, it's just so much worse. They took so much bulk out of it and just put it into its attack stat. For what reason, I don't know. That's a little bit
with its arm.
Yeah. Well, still, it's from a numbers perspective, it's mildly tragic. I found Galarian Slowbro could have been so much better than it actually is. But type distribution is one of my favorite things about this team. I think the only real gripe I have with this team, which I don't even think it's a full gripe, is that I wonder if drafting Redirection at such a high tier is justified here, and it might be. That might not be a real big concern, but I think the Galarian Zapdos, the Galarian Slowbro, and the Azumarill, they all have good reasons to be sitting next to Indeedee, I think. But at the same time, on a team like this that relies a lot on bulk and diverse typings and defensive synergy, Redirection can sometimes fall flat on a team like that. So I'd be a little bit concerned about how valuable Indeedee actually is here. But perhaps I know you're a good player, and I know that there are still mons here that have good reason to sit next to it, so could be that doesn't turn out to be much of a problem. We'll see. What do you think, Dan?
So I went into this draft wanting to pick some cool, weird things. My entire plan was Zapdos G and Indeedee, and then just roll from there with whatever was available. So I'm pretty happy with the way it ended up. Delmise wasn't on my radar until I was thinking about a Trick Room mode, and I looked at the tier, and then I saw it, and then I'm like, what does the Anchor do? Then I looked at it, and I'm like, the Anchor is my Trick Room sweeper. I don't really know what else it does, but it's my Trick Room sweeper. So we're winging it with that. Aurorus and Glaceon, I pulled some inspiration from John from the MDL with the Aurorus. I liked what it's been doing. I think it's got some potential. I've always thought it was cool. I decided I wanted to run with it. Krookodile is somehow available in like the 8th or 9th round for me, so I just felt like that was such a clean glue piece for my team. Overall, I'm really happy with the way the draft turned out for me personally. There's some cool things that I'll hopefully be able to show throughout the season, but I'm not going to give too much else away this time. But with that being said, we've got one more team to look at, and Matt, you requested the privilege of roasting this team.
Yes, I did. Earlier today, I hopefully sort of cryptically convinced Toxic that I was going to shit all over this team. That's not really going to happen. I could not be more proud of Toxic for drafting this way. I absolutely love this draft. And, well, there's for a bunch of different reasons. First of all, it's so fast. Cinderace and Tornadus, I mean, it's obviously incredibly fast, and even if there was a Regieleki on another team, like I wouldn't even care. Just Tailwind Airstream, you outspeed everything if you even need the Airstream, which you often won't. But if your opponent happens to be matching your Tailwind, it's a really good tool to help with that. I also think that the Tornadus is it's I actually like the Tornadus even more next to the Regidrago and Marowak here. Regidrago, for obvious reasons, it really benefits from good speed control, especially Prankster Tailwind. I mean, it's like you get a pseudo priority Dragon Energy, which is incredibly powerful. It's a little bit tough to use, and Regidrago is one of these ones where you have to know exactly when to bring it. I'm currently using it in the MDL. I brought it the first week. It did extremely well, and then it hasn't shown up since because the matchups just weren't favorable to it, even though it did extremely well when it came. So it is one of those mons that you can't just toss it out there in every matchup. It needs to be in the right matchups, but it's really good with this Prankster Tailwind, as is the Marowak, which normally you wouldn't think, well, why is a Trick Room sweeper super good with priority Tailwind? That doesn't really make much sense. Turbo Whack, I think, is better than a lot of people think. It's something that I used when I had Tornadus and Marowak on my championship team from the MDL. Marowak, when you're using like a Jolly set, I ran a Jolly Marowak specifically to outspeed Dan's Tapu Koko when I had Tailwind up. Even when you're doing that, its damage output is still really impressive. You can go straight for a Tailwind Earthquake, since you can Earthquake next to your Tornadus. I did that a couple of times, and it was extremely useful. The ability to do that, I think, probably won me my top 4 game when I had that team. And then the Marowak also works extremely well in Trick Room, and you have a super good Trick Room setter in Kanto Slowbro. Kanto Slowbro and Kanto Marowak, that combination is something that it's got great synergy. They're both pretty slow, especially the Slowbro. You got the taunt immunity on the Slowbro, which is fantastic. They work very well together offensively and defensively. I've used this particular combination in the MDC before, and it's worked incredibly well. I also think that there's a lot of value in some of these low tier picks. Luxray, I'm starting to think maybe deserves to be a tier 3. Actually, I'm not really sure. The Wigglytuff, I don't really see it coming all that often, but it's a nice Intimidate deterrent for the Trick Room mode if you if you really want to abuse the Marowak stuff next to Slowbro, maybe just tossing Wigglytuff onto your team of 6 so your opponent knows that you have competitive might make them think twice about trying to intimidate the Marowak. Using a tier 5 slot for Prankster, Fake Tears, and Thunderwave and Taunt and that kind of thing is really, really nice. I think this is probably one of the tier 5s that's going to get used the most. Sock as a tier 5 is absolutely fantastic. It's one of my favorite tier 5s personally. I think maybe the only tier 5 that might be better than Sock is Hitmonchan, because they do a lot of the same stuff. Just Hitmonchan has a few extra priority moves, but the only real issues I had with this team. Oh, and that's not to mention the Tangela too. Tangela is usually something that I would have I would have mentioned pretty early on, because redirection's really important, and it's something that I like playing with a lot. So it's usually something that demands my attention. But there's so much other good shit here that redirection's kind of secondary to a lot of this stuff. It really, really helps. But there's so much other good stuff that it's it almost doesn't even matter that much, even considering how good redirection actually is. The only real problems I have with this draft are that there's the double fighting type, but one of them's going away for the Regice, which Regice is. I think it's going to be a fun mon. It's fine down there in tier 4. It's got good stats. I wonder if Toxic can make good use of it here, but I'm wondering what exactly it's going to do. But I think it's fun, and I don't think it's a big deal to fill a slot with a more fun Pokemon when so much of your draft is this good. The only other gripe I have is that maybe the Firewater Grass Core could be a little bit more cohesive. I think I was talking about this when we were on the Grimmsnarl slide. This particular Firewater Grass Core doesn't really look like it wants to work together exactly, at least not with not all at the same time. The Cinderace and the Slowbro, I think, is the most awkward pairing here. You can see how the Tangela might work with each one. Redirection next to a big Cinderace doing a lot of damage. It's obvious how that could be good, especially if you want to go for the non-Gmax Cinderace. You could set up the Sun, go for fast Chlorophyll Sleep Powders maybe, and then of course redirection next to your Trick Room setter with this kind of type synergy is great. It's just a little awkward with the Cinderace and the Kanto Slowbro. Those two I think are going to have a harder time working together. But overall, yeah, I love this team. I'm really proud of Toxic for drafting this way. I was the one out of the 3 who was pushing for this team to be number 1. I really genuinely love it. It's got a lot of stuff that I've personally used, and some other stuff that I'm less personally familiar with that is strong nonetheless. So great draft, very deserving of the number 1 slot here for sure.
Matt is a sim. That said, this team is very good. Clearly Toxic has been taking some lessons from things he's learned in the MDL and applying them here. And these aren't all MDL cores and things, and MVC cores and things like that. There's a lot of stuff here that is brand new that I haven't seen before. The big thing that sticks out to me is just that the things I have used before are good, and the things I haven't used before I've seen completely demolish. So Cinderace Torn is something I personally haven't used before. Never had the opportunity. They're always sniped from me because I'm always late on the draft, always. And I know they're good. I've seen Cinderace completely demolish teams. Regidrago's insane. That mon's ridiculous. I actually have run the slow. I have run Slow King Marowak, which is basically the same thing. Let's be honest. And it's insane. I really love that combo. I've seen Luxray pop off. I've seen Wigglytuff pop off. I've seen Sock pop off. There's just a lot of good stuff here. I think the thing that this team has that I'm convinced on is I think the modes are very solid. Just overall, I mean, Torn is the best Tailwind setter in the format essentially, and can sweep on its own if it wants to. And then Slowbro is hands down one of the most consistent Trick Room setters that is not a ghost type, just because of how good the Oblivious ability is. And then everything operates in everything. I mean, he can run a fast Marowak, he can run this various other things. Do I think this team is untouchable? Absolutely not. Initially I had the Rolos above this team, but as Matt and I talked about it, I was eventually convinced to kind of move my ranking up. Mostly just because, in essence, this is a team that I know will perform and work very well if used correctly, more so than the other teams, and that is in part informed by experience, but you also have to remember, Matt is simping for this team, and he has won 2 hyper-competitive leagues in the past, and I've done pretty well myself in a couple leagues, and I've used a couple of these things, and I know that they work quite well. And I got beat by some people who used Regidrago as the kill leader for a season twice. So, Dan, what do you got?
Yeah, I think overall this is a very solid team, has some well-rounded cores, multiple modes. I'm not going to restate what you guys have already stated. I think you've covered basically every point. I want Impodim to come every week because that thing is awesome looking, and I just want to see it on the field. So Toxic, let's make that happen. But
and for the record, just so everyone else knows, we have put Toxic at the bottom of our PRs in the past, like multiple times. This is the highest Matt and I have ever ranked Toxic anyway, just so you all know.
Yeah, I had him at 10th in the MDL PRs.
Yeah, he's somewhere around there in the MDL PRs, and the season prior he was super low. But this is a fantastic team. He did a great job.
Oh yeah, no, this is an awesome job.
This is just a whole other world, yeah. Oh, I would also like to mention just one thing I forgot when I was going on my tirade there. I actually think that Defiant Tornadus might be decently
really
viable on this team. Like, when I was using Tornadus myself, I found it very hard to not bring the Prankster Tailwind variant. I actually never ended up bringing Defiant Tornadus at all, even though I did try. On this team, I can actually see it working a little bit better than maybe it did on mine, and I think if it's more viable here, that also gives you an extra deterrent to Intimidate, because opposing Intimidate's going to be it's going to be really tough for the Marowak and the Cinderace. So I think I'd like to see that at least once or twice. It's possible that giving up the priority Tailwind is still too big of a cost, but I think it can work here. I do.
All right, well, wrapping up the thoughts on Toxic's team, let's go ahead and take a look at this screen where we've got our final standings for the overall power rankings. I don't think that there is too much that we disagree on internally here. Obviously, there's going to be some movement, specifically with Crab Hammers, the 1 through 3 order. There's a lot of disagreement, but there is also some consensus. Do you guys have any closing thoughts before I close this out?
No, I mean, this was the teams here are just very good overall. We did get very nitpicky in this video, in part because this is the superior division, and we felt like if this is the top division of the league and is going to perform at the highest level, this is the one where the most nitpicking, the most criticism kind of should happen. And a lot of it boils down to the pilot. I especially think in this division, it's going to just boil down to how well do you pilot your team. There's some disparity in power, but it's really not that extreme. I think anybody can beat anybody. Take what we've said here, try to use it as best you can to your own advantages and stuff. And we did ask Matt on here just because we thought his opinions would really help some of you out. So thanks for coming on.
Indeed, no problem. Had fun.
All right, well, thank you guys all for joining us on this 100-minute rollicking adventure through the Superior Division. If you think we got anything wrong or would like to leave any feedback, please don't forget to comment below, and also liking and subscribing is appreciated. On behalf of Ryan and Matt, my name is Dan, and this is Stout Gaming. Thank you all for coming out, and we'll see you next time. Bye.